Well, our big debate this evening, we dive into the ripple effects of President Trump's foreign policy on India. He's got an America first foreign policy, and the big question that many in our country have to ask is this: yes, we've got a close strategic relationship with America, but Trump is unpredictable. Look at the way the nature of the relationship with Europe has changed. Are there signs over here that New Delhi needs to be worried? That's what we are looking at. Joining us now, Professor Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations and Political Theory at Macalester College. We're also joined by Harsh Pant, Vice President of the ORF, and in a little while by Taranjit Singh Sandhu, India's former ambassador to India. Professor Latham, let me come to you first. Donald Trump did mention tariffs twice in his speech to Congress with regard to India. There's the entire issue of deportations. There's the entire concern on what happens in the future with H-1B visas. These are 3 or 4 critical issues. Do you believe India has reason to be concerned?
Yes and no. There are always going to be frictions between countries. This is not quite unique to India, but it's perhaps especially pronounced. But the bigger and broader background issue, I think, should be reassuring to Indians. The Trump administration grasps this is not the bipolar world of the Cold War, 2 superpowers. It's not the unipolar world of the post-Cold War era, the United States upholding the rules-based international order, invading countries that deviated from the norms, etc. This is a new era. And it's one of multipolarity. That's not a strategy, that's a structural reality. There are a number of great powers. The United States is perhaps first among equals, but China, India, Turkey, there are half a dozen to a dozen of these great powers. And what we see with the Trump administration is they kind of intuit this. I don't think they've thought it through fully, but they intuit that the U.S. in this new world needs to disentangle itself from Europe. That means bringing the Ukraine war to an end. It means disentangling itself from the Middle East and relying on Israel and Saudi Arabia to blunt and balance Turkey and Iran, and then shifting its resources to both hemispheric security, hence all the talk about Greenland and Panama and Canada and so on. But from India's perspective, most importantly, a shift in American strategic attention to the Indo-Pacific in a serious way, because this Trump administration sees China as not just an economic challenge, but as a strategic and military threat. And so, the Quad is a manifestation of this, although it was born, obviously, before the second Trump administration. India, given its size, its power, and its interests, which align with the U.S., make it a natural partner, along with Australia and Japan and a few other countries. There's no way in the world the Trump administration is going to jeopardize that relationship, sure, even though there will continue to be frictions between New Delhi and Washington when it comes to immigration and things like that.
Okay. Harsh Pant, do you believe that China is a big unifier in the relationship between Washington and New Delhi? All right, we'll just come back to Professor Pant. We've lost that line for a moment. Professor Latham, let me come back to you. What are some of the areas where you foresee trouble between Washington and New Delhi? I identified 2 or 3 of them. Do you believe that there are particular specific areas of concern which you'd like to highlight?
Yeah. I mean, you're spot on. I would say 2, obviously. One is the trade relationship and tariffs. Trump thinks tariffs are a beautiful word. And it's unclear still whether he really thinks tariffs are merely a negotiating lever or whether he really wants to onshore all kinds of production back to the United States. The jury's out on that. And the other one, which I think is a real sore point in India, is the immigration piece. Not just the H-1Bs, but the return, last month was it, of undocumented Indians in shackles, basically, which I think played very poorly in India. Those would be the 2 big issues. I think when it comes to defense and security, there's a great deal of alignment of interests and a great deal of potential cooperation in the air. But those are the 2 sticking points, and they play differently in the domestic politics of both countries. Right? The U.S. right now really wants to deal with the undocumented alien. That's the way they call them here.
Professor Latham, let me ask you this. How would you respond to those who say that at one level the relationship between India and America is transactional, by which I mean there is a huge expectation in the United States that India invests more in American weaponry. Now, India, as you know, imports weaponry from all sorts of places, from Russia, from Israel, and indeed from the United States, France as well. But there's the F-35, which has now been reportedly offered to India. Do you believe that at one level, the expectation of the Trump regime is, look, India needs to invest in our defense industry for the relationship to really realize its true potential?
Well, there's something to that, but I think the transactional piece is about bargains within a broader context. Okay, so which fighter aircraft? The United States has an interest, as I think India does, in weaning India off the legacy Soviet/Russian military systems and weapons. And what is the best way to cement that deeper security relationship? It's both to have India buying American weapon systems, but also the United States. I think it was Hindustan Aerospace, or I'm not quite sure the name, and General Electric building engines for the F-35s, I think. So it's transactional at the micro level, but deeper. We're not having those kind of relationships with Russia and China at the moment, right? So there are deals to be done, transactions to be completed, but within that broader strategic context. And again, there will be frictions. There will be things that the U.S. and India don't agree on from time to time. But both sides are highly incentivized to cooperate and to minimize those frictions to the extent possible. I'm actually very pessimistic about the United States' relationship with Europe. And I'm very pessimistic as a Canadian about the United States' relationship with Canada. But I'm very optimistic about the United States' relationship with India.
All right. Well, earlier today, I spoke to Taranjit Singh Sandhu, India's former ambassador to the United States, someone who's really worked that relationship over the last couple of years. Remember, there have been so many agreements, they're called foundational agreements, which India and the US have really got going over a period of time, over a decade, in fact, to take India and the US to the level of very, very close strategic partners. The Prime Minister was recently, just a few weeks back, was among the first leaders to meet Donald Trump. Let's listen in to what Ambassador Sandhu told me a little while back. Well, joining us now to look at Trump's foreign policy and how it will impact India, Taranjit Singh Sandhu. He's been India's ambassador to Washington. Thank you so very much for being with us. How will Donald Trump's approach to several issues, for example, let's start up with Trump's immigration policies, how could that impact India's skilled workforce in the United States?
So I think rather than having a panic reaction to him, I would say that it's important to understand the background. President Trump this time had very clear positions as a candidate. And there are 3 or 4 issues. If we look at them, all of this falls in line to an extent. One, of course, is the domestic and economy, and in that cost of living, wasteful international engagements. Now, this is what his perception is. And we have to take it as he went to the people. Energy is in another exercise, imbalance of trade, and then, of course, trimming the government. And what you raised about crime, law and order, immigration, and deportations, these are all connected. And he got elected on that mandate. So, therefore, we have a president of the United States who has been elected on a certain mandate with a number of states which have backed him, including the 7 swing states. And therefore, it's important to deal with him.
Sure.
I think the India relationship is a much deeper and a wider relationship and should also be seen in that perspective.
Ambassador, how will Trump's America First trade policies affect India's export-driven economy?
So I think, Vishnu, our economy and our relationship with the United States is also multifaceted. What he has been talking about, again, I'm only trying to explain, he's talking about imbalance. And India has about 40 billion there. You are aware that the Commerce and Industry Minister is right there. In fact, the meeting, the joint statement, talks of a trade deal between the two. And he has gone there to discuss that. So a part of that has to do with this imbalance. And I think it's going to be an overall give and take, which he has often spoken about with other countries too.
So, what role will India play in Trump's strategy to counter China?
So I think that's a very important aspect to keep in mind. And there are four aspects of China in the United States which we must keep in mind. First, of course, is the business angle, which everybody now talks about. There are several important businessmen in the United States who feel that U.S.-China economic relationship should open up. So that's one kind of pressure. But there is also the strategic aspect. And there are a number of people in the Trump administration who have clear positions on China. So that's also going to be, now Secretary of State and NSA are part of that. The third part is domestic politics in the United States. Now China is an important factor, and Trump is responsive to the local domestic situation. So that's another one angle. And finally, if I may say that there is a personal angle here, don't forget. In 2020, President Trump believes that he lost because of COVID. And often he calls it a Chinese virus. And I think if you look at the CIA director and a lot of other statements which have come out, that's also. So it's going to be an interplay of all this. And I think the strategic part is going to be significant. And therefore, India's role, look, India is also having its own discussions with China. So it is going to be a complicated game, but I think where challenges come, opportunities do arise there too.
Ambassador, how will Trump's approach to climate change potentially impact our own energy goals and climate goals?
So there is definitely a clear position, a relatively clear position on climate change as we look at green technologies, etc., of President Trump during the campaign and subsequently too. But as far as India is concerned, look, we have huge energy requirements. And in our energy basket, a number of things come in. One, of course, oil is an important part. LNG is an important part, which has been accepted as a transition fuel. Then solar is an important part. And now, what are called small modular reactors, nuclear energy is also going to be an important part. And that is part of the clean energy. So therefore, I would say that U.S.-India partnership in energy is only going to deepen. And if we go to Trump 1.0, in fact, LNG export to India started during that time. So I would take a bigger picture there.
Would Donald Trump's unpredictable nature and his unpredictable diplomacy, I mean, he seems to have pulled the rug from underneath the feet of Europe of late. But that unpredictability in his temperament and the way that he goes about his policy, could that strengthen or potentially strain America-India bilateral ties?
I would only say, Vishnu, that India is pretty apt at playing what you are actually talking about unpredictability. I think EM has called it the kind of multipolarity. So Indian diplomacy is pretty apt at working on that. I think for example, let's take Ukraine, Russia. What has been India's position in it? Prime Minister Modi has several times said that this is not an era of war. In a different way, Trump is also saying the same thing. I mean, a similar thing. Look, no two positions can be same. So I think India would find a lot of opportunity in this situation too. And I think to say that is Trump completely moving away from Europe, I don't know if that's really the entire truth, because it's still too early. We need to view it, but certainly he has advocated no war on Ukraine-Russia front, and he's trying to implement that. And I think India's position overall has been broadly on the same lines, if not absolutely similar.
Ambassador, skeptics of our relationship going forward with the United States would actually point to the Ukraine situation and say that all of a sudden America has cut off military aid, they've cut off intelligence aid. Therefore, as India seeks to deepen our military relationship with the United States and potentially acquire state-of-the-art weapon systems, whatever they may be, can we actually potentially be a victim to unpredictable American policies and also, for example, guidelines such as end user monitoring?
So look, the relationship will always be give and take. And here, the defense relationship, it is also important as a market for United States. And that's where the diplomacy, discussions, and bargaining comes. I don't think we will ever be in that kind of a situation because, look, we also have a part of our relationship as co-production, co-development, which has been happening. So, and here, look at it. I mean, the offer has been of F-35. Whether it happens or not is a different issue. You know, the foreign secretary has spoken about it. But the question is of trust. And I think India is one of the very, very few countries where the United States has come forward and offered. So I think it will be a much deeper partnership and it will not be one-way street.
All right, Ambassador Sandhu, always a pleasure speaking to you, and let's see where this relationship with the United States goes. You have worked very closely on building this relationship over several years, as have your predecessors, and indeed American diplomats and others as well. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us.
Thank you. It's going to be a very interesting time.
Well, joining us now, Harsh Pant, Vice President of ORF. Harsh, we lost the line with you a little while earlier on. Good to have you back on. I was asking you about China. Do you believe that it is the China connection which binds Washington and New Delhi closest at this stage going forward for Trump?
See, certainly, Vishnu, I think China is an important factor. And I think the way Mr. Trump relates to China, I think is still shrouded in mystery. We still don't know exactly how he's going to relate to China. He has made all kinds of noises. We were hearing from the ambassador that, look, there are certain people in his administration who are vociferous against China. For the first time, we have a secretary who will be sanctioned by China. So clearly, but at the same time, Mr. Trump says that, look, he wants to have a stable relationship. He wants to solve global problems with Xi Jinping. So we really don't know which way the wind is going to blow. But certainly, overarching framework of his foreign policy from Trump 1.0 to Trump 2.0, if there has been one thread, it has been a thread of this posturing and significant action against China. Incidentally, Mr. Biden also followed most of his policies and accelerated them. So there is a structural change in the international system, which I think America is responding to, irrespective of the administration. And that works to the benefit of India's relationship with the US. It is not that all the problems are going to be resolved, all the challenges are going to dissolve because of the China question. But certainly it gives you a framework to work with. And I think, therefore, the defense framework, the security framework, the Indo-Pacific framework that emerged out of this China question allow the two sides to navigate perhaps what is going to be a very turbulent phase because of Mr. Trump's unpredictability. But a framework is available, and China factor allows that framework to comprehensively look at the relationship.
How do you look at the entire H-1B visa issue? You know, as we talk high strategy, I suspect most people watching this program would want to know about H-1B visas, professionals and their kids as well.
Yes, I think that can be, one of the things that has driven India-US relationship over the last few years. We have often talked about it, both in academic sense and in operational sense. It has been a relationship unique in its nature. It has been top-down and bottom-up. Top-down, where strategic community is strategic policymakers have injected a sense of direction in the relationship, invested in the relationship, like Ambassador Sandhu and his predecessors on the Indian side and American ambassadors on the American side. American policymakers and Indian policymakers both have given a sense of direction to the relationship. But the relationship has also been very dynamic because of the people-to-people ties. And I think once you remove that, once a degree of strain emerges in that aspect, I think it's going to make a difference to the relationship, to the texture of the relationship. We don't have a similar relationship with any other country. So when you look at the visa question, it is ultimately a people-centric question, and many in India who have looked at the U.S. As a country which has been very welcoming, which has given opportunities to to our middle classes. I think that sentiment might change over a period of time if the direction of what the debate in the U.S. and what is happening in the U.S., what Mr. Trump is doing, he twist in American society at the moment, which is questioning immigration policy. And I think that sentiment will be reflected in the way American policymakers will respond, and that will have an impact on India, on Indian sentiment, on popular Indian sentiment about the US, and there is no way you can insulate the relationship from that. But I think it is now for the government to see, and I think Trump has given several indications that he's willing to give in to certain kinds of immigrants, high net worth individuals perhaps, or talented individuals as he calls them. And I think there is a space there to maneuver. We had this situation in Trump 1.0 as well, where then he went back on H-1B visa issue and gave India a lot of leeway in managing this issue. So perhaps a bit of negotiations there might also help.